Sure.
Hopefully. This is my second one of these that I've done, and it's so complex. There's so many moving parts.
Yeah, it's helpful to have like a little someone who's like on your side, assistant. I thought you were acting.
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, running the show for you mean?
It's helpful to have someone assist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't hired a game show host yet, so let's see if this is.
Who's your boss? Who's your Vanna? Virtual assist.
Okay, it's working. Yay! Okay. So I wanted to introduce it first. Just talk about you two, what you bring to the table in this department. You two have been curating community for several years now around polyamorous relationships.
Lots of years.
Yeah. Well, what I'm familiar with is the PolyHearts Circle, which I got to go to several of your events years ago. What's that?
There you go. Brandon was updating our names.
Oh, good. You two have been hosting the PolyHearts Heart Circle for how many years now?
Well, it's an interesting history. It actually started out as a
community potluck.
As a community potluck with a heart circle kind of towards the tail end of it.
Yeah.
And in the peak of our years there, I think I recall at one point our circle was around the whole perimeter of our great room in our house. And like people were kind of like also standing in the kitchen, kind of leaning in. And there must have been like 30 people, because there was something magical about a moment where people are being emotionally raw or transparent in a safe space that don't normally have access to that. You know, I've always played as like a walks between for communities. It goes back to my social butterfly in high school. But that potluck with heart circle space eventually morphed into PolyHearts in circular motion, or PolyHearts heart circle. And we separated the potluck from the heart circle because it almost started to become distracting for people. And that's when we put the polyamory perspective on it. When it was a potluck, it wasn't necessarily about polyamory. It was just about a normal heart circle of just like speaking from your heart and getting in touch with that. And when we split it up, when we took out the community potluck element, it got a lot smaller, first of all. So, you know, food is also an attractor for community when it comes to community building. Note taken. But also, that's when we put the polyamory subject onto the heart circle. And, you know, people came, and when we put that heart, when we put the polyamory kind of category on the heart circle, I'm not polyamorous. Can I come? Or I don't know if I'm polyamorous. Or I'm polyamorous, but I'm not actually dating multiple people. Is that okay if I come? And, you know, we're like, of course you can come. You know, this is a conversation for people at all levels, at all perspectives, at all places. And most recently, we've been playing around with mask leaning versus femme leaning, and even to put any sort of genderized call in the invitation. So that's been an interesting conversation too.
And to answer the question, Eric, the original form of the circle with the potluck, as Matt was mentioning, started 6 or 7 years ago. And then the PolyHearts has been in that community, has been in process now for maybe 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing the community potluck with Heart Circle before we were together, actually. And we've been together for about 7 years. Right. So it's been more like 10, but the Poly Heart Circle has been what you said, Brandon.
About
4 years. Yeah. And even when we went abroad, so we got married in 2017 and went abroad to South America for almost 18 months. And I found a facilitator that kept it going for us in Portland while we were gone. And then actually right when I came back, he handed it back off to me. So it went, we didn't participate mostly during that time, but it was still going in Portland. So it is continuous for the last four years.
One of the reasons I thought that was so important was that when you host a circle for that many years, and here, you know, in every circle, you have maybe 12 people, sometimes 6 people, sometimes 20 people, each sharing a piece of their struggle, each bringing up a thing that they're working through. As a person curating that, you get such a broad vision of the subject matter. You kind of get to collate all that information together and know what the biggest challenges are for people, and get to see them on that whole story arc. So I thought that would be, you're such a great node of information on this subject now for hosting it that long. And by the way, I was at one of those potlucks.
Yeah, I'm just curious about people.
Yeah, of course. I was at one of those parties. I think it was in 2014. It was my first week in Portland, and I accidentally got invited to your house, and I went in there. I'm like, this is Portland.
You didn't know what you were getting into.
There's cute boys who know how to make casseroles, and now they're in a heart circle. I'm like, I'm home.
We had some really good cooks in the potluck. Yeah, it was one of the one of the reasons why I think so many people came is we actually had really good food. So.
Oh yeah. It was one cute boy after another coming out of the kitchen with a big casserole dish in his hand. It's like, yes. So as a subject, I wanted to kind of talk about what in that experience, in those years that you've been doing it, and you're also you're a polyamorous relationship, I'm assuming now. Are you two in a state of that kind of relationship? Okay, great. So you have
continue. That's really been the context for our relationship from the beginning.
Okay. So you have the story of what has been your personal challenge within the background of what you're seeing everyone else be challenged with. And I want to talk today a little bit about what you see some of the biggest skills that people have to build, or what is it that most people maybe aren't naturally inclined to do and they have to learn how to do. Like when you step into this world, into this kind of a lifestyle, the immediately you're hit with certain skills that you might feel like you're lacking. And I'm curious what some of those things that you've seen people identify are.
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting. One of the things that I've witnessed over these years has been people both who identify as open or poly or curious, and people who identify more as monogamous, make these comments like, how do you do it? Right? Yeah. Like that seems so hard, or there aren't many examples of successful relationship out there. And one of the things for me that I've really seen is the tools that we've developed to have a healthy and happy, successful relationship are actually applicable to all relationships. Yeah. And so there's this, to me, I kind of see a little bit of a misconception that like you have to have like a really special toolkit to have a successful polyamorous relationship. Things that make our relationships successful actually make all relationships successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, our relationship actually germinated in my prior relationship, or both of our prior relationships. We were both in multi-year long relationships when we met. Mm-hmm. And I met Brandon when he came over to my living room as like a date with my ex. And so the three of us had my first experience of Brandon was in a threesome date. And what ended up happening was we just continued dating as my prior relationship, emotionally came to an end. And I'm still really good friends with my ex, but Brandon and our relationship continued on the intimate level. And so our relationship really came out of a polyamorous relationship. So I think in some ways, I've been in a relationship where we were closed and then we opened to polyamorous relationship. And then I met Brandon and our relationship really began as a polyamorous relationship. Eventually he ended up breaking up with his partner at the time. And then it was mostly, and even after that, I was still dating one other person while I was dating Brandon. And, we've gone over different types and series of relationships. So I think it's important to note that our relationship actually started out as a polyamorous relationship, but we both have experience in polyamorous relationships from the place where we started closed and then opened it up. And so that personal experience, I think, has been a huge strength for us as we've continued to encounter these conversations. But the other thing, that as Brandon was saying, polyamorous relationships, being polyamory gives you access to have basically more relationships. So you get good at it. You get a lot of practice and you get a lot of feedback. And the thing about how adults learn is that we learn from our lived experience more than, the traditional teacher stand up in front of the classroom and tell us what to do. By the way, you don't learn emotional resilience skills in school, Of course, like you said, Eric, people don't necessarily have these skills, but it's not because they're special skills. It's not because you're choosing a polyamorous relationship as a label that now all of a sudden you got to learn a whole new skill set for relationships. It's actually the exact same skill set, but it requires a lot more courage. It requires conquering shame. It requires emotional transparency, which is one thing we want to talk about today.
And it requires being willing to own and live that lifestyle in a culture and society that is based in monogamy. And, so there's all sorts of preconceived ideas about what is right and wrong, that's built into the system.
Which is where it kind of feels like coming out again. We're both male identified gay, and we all have our coming out experiences as homosexuals, lesbians, and transgendered in our community, right? As bi. And so, there's that training, I guess, for again coming out as poly. I came out as poly to my mom and my brother when I was on a trip with them visiting actually Colorado, and their response was not supportive initially, but I was prepared for that because of my LGBT experience growing up in this culture. And of course, we live in this little bubble called Portland, Oregon, where there's tons of polyamory types of conversations happening, but I think it's more of it's kind of cool to be polyamory than actually committed to doing the work, which is another thing to talk about. Is good relationships are built, they're not discovered. So when people are looking for relationships, it's like, okay, that's great, you're looking for a partner, but what are you doing to create that in your existing relationships? There's relationships that you're having right now which you could build into an intimate relationship. Like there's trust there, there's experience there, and it does take work. And that's one of the things we wanted to talk about today, is some of the work that we've gone through to build that.
Can you say that one more time? Because the compression. What? 1 second. 1 second. Okay. 1 second. Let me fix something on the internet.
Okay.
Hey, baby. It's really hard to. the internet's breaking down. Okay. Okay. my boyfriend's in the other room playing video games across the internet, so it might be compressing the video. So
self-quarantine coping strategies.
Exactly. So a couple of things that you brought up, I like that, we might identify the kind of skills that are basic relationship skills, but in some ways they become more highlighted in an open relationship, that like they're almost more necessary. Like they make any relationship great, but if you don't have them, you're really aware of it in an open relationship. For instance, the ability to
For
deal
sure.
with
Yeah.
things like jealousy, self-esteem issues, and
Uh-huh.
the ability to discuss the kind of micro detail of emotions that arise, the emotions that arise that you're not necessarily saying, you're not necessarily telling your partner, hey, this is terrible, everything has to stop, but you're both processing the emotions real time with each other, because you realize as you're moving into an open relationship, or as you're starting to behave slightly differently than you've been trained to behave, that inherently
Right.
in that new territory, stuff comes up, and hopefully your partner is able to sort of be there to balance and process and reflect with you as little alerts pop up in your system. You know, I noticed when I started to venture into open relationship territory, those alerts came hard and fast, really quick. You know, just like, oh, I'm feeling something. Oh, I'm feeling something I was not expecting. And another thing I also wanted to talk about
Yeah.
was that, um, kind of reflecting what you also said, a person can kind of commit philosophically to being in an open relationship. Like, it's a great idea. It's a mental activity. It's an identity. It's a thing you put on your profile. But then in the doingness, it's a whole nother animal. You know, there's some moments where
Mm-hmm.
after
Yeah.
being into the process several months, you might have a little day where you're like, I don't want to be in an open relationship anymore. Not today. You know, not this feeling. And I found that many times
Mhm.
when I first started venturing into this territory 10 years ago, I would have days where I, I felt like I told everybody I was polyamorous, but I was having those super tight constrictions, like, oh, it doesn't feel right now, or it doesn't feel good right now, or and so sometimes people have that compression, that tightness that happens, and that oh, it's great. I believe in this. This is working, and I noticed that in my own journey a lot.
I mean, yeah, listen, Eric, we live in a culture where people are not emotionally transparent. Like when you ask someone how they're doing, people say good and fine. They don't say, I'm having a terrible day. Thanks for asking. And not in a sarcastic way, just being honest,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And to your point, the skills of being in a polyamorous relationship, they're not necessarily different, but those alerts, like you said, come hard and fast. You cannot sweep that stuff under the rug. You
Mhm.
have to deal with all of those alerts that come up. And it might be in the relationships are built, not discovered, that you actually have to take the time to go through the conversation and address the jealousy, address the I'm not getting enough, this or that in the relationship. Um, have to deal with I don't like that person, why are you dating them, you know? I wouldn't date that person, thus you shouldn't date that person. Let's have that conversation, you know? So in the beginning, you know, Brandon and I had a ton of rules that were designed for both of us to feel safe,
Yeah.
and we also have operated without as many rules. And I say, you know, polyamory is different depending on who you talk to, which is it's kind of the non-label. So having
Right.
an opportunity to, you know, define it yourself is really important. But just know that, um, you know, you have to be able to deal with each of those emotional items as they come up, and you have to build that trust in whatever way works for you.
Yeah, and I think to your, you asked the question, Eric, what are one of those skills that might get highlighted, or one of those things that are highlighted in an open or poly relationship that are applicable to all relationships, but they become really apparent. And that's transparency. And it's that transparency of all those little emotions that, come up, that you become hyper aware of, those alerts in our body or in our emotional body. And as Matt was saying, you can't sweep those under the rug. And so how do you get good at being transparent with your partner and allowing the space for those things to be up in myself, And really, how do you create a relationship, the container for the relationship that can hold these things so that it feels safe, so that I can express my jealousy, or that I can express, that I actually want attention tonight, or I'm in an emotional place where I need something.
Yeah.
And that I can trust the relationship to be able to hold that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's one of these skills that really takes some in kind of, all these little points kind of tie together, but it takes commitment to the process of building that container so that I can be fully transparent what's happening, and that transparency can allow the relationship to hold what is coming through, regardless of what the outcome is. But that point of not burying is so important in this realm.
There's going to be bumps in the road. And people, I think, sometimes have this idea that they're not, the perfect relationship, or the relationship that they're going to discover or find that's out there for them is one where, there's minimal bumps in the road. I'll tell you what, the strongest, longest lasting relationships have overcome some pretty big bumps, because what happens when you encounter the issues that come up in those relationships, the misalignments, the hurt feelings, the stupid things that I do, that Brandon never does any stupid things. Those, when we have that conversation and overcome those things, the relationship deepens. There are opportunities to build a more emotionally resilient relationship. And when people don't speak, which is fundamentally shame, when you are not willing to say what's on your heart, the relationship just goes ever so slightly misaligned, and ever so slightly misaligned, and ever so slightly misaligned. And when you're in a polyamorous relationship, the feedback loop is so quick that you start to get those little alerts like you were talking about, and you have to resolve those. Unlike like a monogamous model, where you can kind of just lean on some social assumptions that help you get by. I'm not saying that you don't have to address those issues in a monogamous relationship. Of course you do, but you have less time to resolve those in a polyamorous relationship before things start blowing up, in my experience.
Okay. So I just want to say we have some watchers on Facebook. So if anybody, hi Stephen, Pascal, Mark Casey, Christos, if any of y'all have any questions for us as we go along, just chat them in here and we'll try to address them. And I want to click on this subject and go a little deeper. I want to click on the subject and go a little deeper. We're talking about transparency. So let's break it down. Let's pretend I don't know what transparency is. How do you define it? And then I want to know, in your experience, what fosters it? What creates an atmosphere where transparency flows? And creates an atmosphere where transparency is impeded? And maybe we could also look at what the choice of stepping into transparency, what makes it hard to do that, what you have to overcome, what balancing skills help a person. There's probably like 4 or 5 little mini skills that go into being transparent that you can kind of build up on their own. So let's kind of riff on that a little bit and go a bit deeper into that concept of transparency. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I think let's start with identifying what transparency is. And so I would say that transparency is really having the courage to speak what is emotionally going on for me. What's coming up in my heart space or in my thought space.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I love, have you ever read Gay and Katie Hicks, The Conscious Heart? They talk about in that book telling the micro truth, which is it's getting into your thoughts, what beliefs are coming up, what's happening in your body, specifically where it's happening in your body, what emotions are coming up. Like there's so many little bits of the truth that get beyond, I'm okay, I'm fine,
Yeah, and you have to like identify what that moment is. Like for me, the moment is, oh, I don't want to tell Brandon that. That's when I know I have to speak it, because we've already committed to each other to hold each other's emotional well-being. So that's a commitment that we have.
Yeah.
So speaking inside that commitment of he's going to hold my emotional well-being, I have that I can speak anything to him and he's committed to holding that. So I think it's important to talk about commitment, because with no commitment, there's no responsibility for him to show up or for me to show up, right? And so you got to have that leveling.
Well, so what is transparency to you?
So that, I mean, I was just going to say exactly what he said, but my lived example of that is when I don't want to speak something, it takes courage to be transparent and say that. I mean, let's get into the juicy details. You know, like when I'm pursuing sex outside of my relationship with Brandon, early on in our relationship, I really struggled with being completely transparent with Brandon. And that obviously caused a lot of rupture emotionally in the relationship, where I had to learn over time and over experience to trust that he can hold whatever was going on in my like sexual expression. And there were things I didn't want to tell him. And he knew that I wasn't telling him, which is the worst, because you're like, you think you're getting away with something. And of course your partner knows, you know, they know what's going on, or they know something's going on. And that doesn't feel good for them. It doesn't feel good for me, but you know, it kept my ego safe. But I'm sorry, like you got to conquer that negative ego, that part of you that has no desire to be seen, the part of you that's clouded in shame because of the cultural story that we're in, that we can't talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying you got to drop all the barriers at once. Like ours was obviously a multi-year process. We had some pretty tough conversations. And even at one point, not many people know this, but we took a moment where we basically took a pause and ended our relationship and then restarted it with completely new commitments. And that was a way of just resolving and completing the past, and then stating a new intention or a new creation moving forward. And that was important for us at the time. I'm not saying you have to break up and then get back together again, because it's not a healthy thing to do, to kind of be in and out of relationship like that. But you know, we're at a pretty tough breaking point for both of us, where it was like, we actually can't continue on top of this. So let's have that conversation. So I just want to note like some of the real examples of what's happening. You know, if I have unprotected sex with someone and I don't want to tell Brandon that has an impact on his sexual health as well as his emotional well-being, and
the health of the relationship.
And the health of there's this other thing called the health of the relationship. There's his emotional well-being, my emotional well-being, and then there's like that fluid transaction that is the relationship. And I had to learn to trust that whatever I had to say, he could hold. So there were conversations when I'm sitting there and maybe I don't say anything for 2 minutes because I'm just like working through my negative ego until I get to the point where it's like, okay, I'm not leaving this conversation until I say the truth, until I say the truth. And I don't know that Brandon can hold that until I do it.
Yeah.
There's nothing he can say and no promise he can make for me to believe that in my internal self that wants nothing to do with being emotionally transparent. The only way to get there is to do it and to experience it, because in that lived reality is where that trust is built. And that's why I say good relationships are built. You can't think your way into a polyamorous relationship. You have to take the actions. And I'll say for me, and it may be different for other people listening, but for me, my indicator is if I don't want to say it, that's exactly the thing that I need to say to continue on in this relationship and get emotionally radically transparent in my emotional expression.
I like that. That's a great little ding. Because sometimes my indicators are things I'm feeling, and sometimes my indicators are patterns of behavior I've already identified. When this happens, I need to be aware, like this path, when I start acting this way, that's a little alert. And I like that you're framing it that way. It's kind of like a signal to yourself that if I keep walking down this path, I know where it goes already. I'll go out of alignment with my relationship. So
yeah, and your negative ego will get in the way and try and muck that up. Like one of our real practical structures. We don't do this now, but early on in the relationship, it was like, okay, you need to tell me beforehand, or at a later point in the relationship, it was, you got to tell me within 24 hours, and it provides your ego like this kind of like, okay, I got to do it by this point, no matter what, because you're never going to find the right circumstance. You're never going to find the right context. You're never going to find the right time to say the thing you don't want to say.
Right. So how do you, what's your sentence? What's your conversation starter? Your ego's like, oh, I don't want to say it. Like, how do you start that sentence? How do you start that conversation? What's the first sentence?
It usually starts with Brandon's eyebrows. Wait, can you do the eyebrows? Do the eyebrows. And then I'm like, oh shit, I need to tell him.
yeah, exactly.
You know your partner, right?
I mean, for me, say that again.
I was wondering if you mean that he's sensing it psychically in your field. Like you're walking in with a secret and it's like, boom, and he bumps him on the head and he's like, okay, what was that? Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, totally. And, I guess for me, like that resistance that we were talking about is always my indicator that a conversation needs to happen. And like the way that I personally start those conversations, those tough conversations, is by creating some space for it, and whether that's a private space, we go into the bedroom or the living room, making sure that there's not other people around. Like it's that set and setting, so make sure that the set is the right set and setting, and then it's just getting the first word out of my mouth, which often is like, so I need to share something, or I want to share something with you.
Okay.
And it, especially if it's something that is scary, I think help expressing that to start with. And also making sure that my partner is in a space to be able to hold the conversation. If he's getting ready to go to work or jump on a call or walk out the door, like that's not the right time to try to engage in a difficult conversation. And so, making sure that you create the space for it so that you can both be present. And then expressing sometimes, there's something that I want to say, this is hard for me, or I've been scared to say this, or I'm afraid that you're going to be mad, so, I need to have a conversation with you. But I think it's helpful to express the emotional feeling that I'm in around the topic so that it can help prepare him for maybe the weight or the gravity of what's coming, so that we can actually start to create some resonance and start to match energetically, so that you can get into that conversation and allow the relationship to start to hold that conversation.
I think another practical tip, if you're just starting out with polyamory or starting out with open relationships, is just to set a time on the calendar at least once a week when you're both available and can show up consistently and reliably, to just sit down and talk. Because you don't necessarily know early on in the relationship or early on in your polyamory experience what needs to be said. But when you sit down and basically have a one-on-one heart circle where you just start talking about what's going on for you, you discover the words that you need. And then you discover what needs to be said. It might just be, hey, things are great. But you might also discover that thing you did in bed the other night I really didn't like. And you never would have told your partner that if you didn't have that space created. So in the beginning, you don't necessarily know that you need to say something. So having some time set aside, like beginner tip, like definitely set some regular time aside where you both show up to that conversation very regularly, and not because you think you need to say something, or not because you've planned to say something. You could walk into that conversation not knowing what needs to be shared, and maybe there's nothing, but the times when there is something and you didn't know it, that's what that time is for. And it's just good to have that one-on-one non-screen time where you're sitting together and just sharing what's on your heart anyway. You're going to be building those emotional resilience skills and transparency skills that you need to have. I'll also say that, what's that?
I love that idea.
This is really distracting.
I know, but you have to slow down. You're not giving him space.
Yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to say was that, you know, when something's going on for Brandon, I don't wait anymore. I address it immediately. And sometimes that's in front of other people. And people just know now that like that may happen when they're hanging out with us. Like if he gets tipped off about something, I'm not going to wait until we're like in a private space to do it, because I know that it's actually going to be a little bit worse then, because then we're trying to remember what happened. And I'll just say this, like, I think I have a great memory. Brandon thinks he has a great memory. Our memory is piss poor, and it actually doesn't matter what was said. You know, we used to do this thing where you said this and then you said that and then I said this, and you know what? That you may think that that's helpful. It's really not, because the point is this person feels this way. This person feels this way, regardless of what was said.
Yeah.
Like you could have said something like, I hope you have a great day. And I took it all the wrong ways. Like, so it doesn't matter what you said. And so going into he said, she said, they said, doesn't really help the conversation. What really helps the conversation is, again, going back to emotional resilience and transparency. What's actually going on in your heart right now?
Yeah, presencing.
And being aware and cognizant and being able to articulate that is a practice that you get into, that, you know, your prior relationships and school and all your prior life experiences may not have taught you to do. So whenever you do have something to say, this is your opportunity to deepen the relationship. And I think that's the way to look at it.
Yeah, I love that idea, because every time something comes up from your partner, it can be temporarily annoying, especially when you want everything to be calm and there to be no problems. But it usually means you're about to discover some hidden piece of your partner's inner landscape that you didn't know was there. It's like, oh, there's a mountain there. I didn't even know. I've been driving around in the dark and I just bumped into that mountain, and it's jolting, but it's a whole nother part of the terrain that you get to discover about your partner. So if you can kind of make that translation in your brain, like my partner's getting triggered, that it means I'm about to discover a deeper aspect of him or her, then you can actually kind of have fun with it when stuff comes up. You know, I want to go back, rewind.
Yeah, and you might.
Okay, go ahead, Brandon.
Just on that, I was just going to say it might be something that you're both discovering too.
Yeah.
You know, I'll let you go on. It looked like you had a place to go with that, but
I want to come back to something we talked about just about 10 minutes ago about the setting the stage through a co-commitment with each other. And I want to go deeper into that, about what does the conversation look like when you co-commit to each other to create this safe space to explore each other's emotions? Like what's that conversation actually look like? Do you create some ground rules? I would imagine, I mean, if I were going to go through that process, I would think that it's a little bit like saying, look, if you come to me with this kind of information, I promise that I will try to react this way as best as I can, or I'll try to, hear you out. Or could you tell me a little bit about what that initial game setting co-commitment look like for you two?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. One of the prefaces for that conversation for us was that we identified that we really wanted to create a platform for our relationship versus a box or a container, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to build something that was a jumping off point that really allowed us the freedom to live and express ourselves fully versus something that was going to be restricting or containing our personal expression in this life. And so when we identified, okay, we want to create a platform to live together and to support each other, to express fully from, then we started to be able to identify, okay, what are the things that we need to feel or that we need to have in place? Just
Oh, Brandon, you may have to rewind 10 seconds because it seems like the stream cut out just a little bit. Could you say that one more time?
yeah, sure. Yeah, we got that notification. The internet was a little weak there. What we first identified was that we wanted to create a platform for our relationship to be able to exist from, to be able to support each of our personal expression and freedom in this life versus something that was restricting and containing and limiting. So that was really the first piece for us. And then we started to have a conversation around, okay, what do we need to feel? What do we need to have in place to feel safe and secure in a relationship that's going to allow us to express fully? And as Matthew said earlier, you know, we had multiple rounds of iterations of what these commitments were. You know, we had them around we don't have unprotected sex outside of our relationship, around telling each other beforehand if we were wanting to go and hook up with somebody or go on a date with somebody, what our intentions were. You know, honest and open, transparent communication. At one point, we had them all written down. We had them in a document so that we could always refer back to them in our check-ins. And in our weekly check-ins, we were actually coming back to these and seeing, like, how are these feeling to us?
And that's where this idea of the platform really evolved out of, because we're constantly evolving as human beings. Like Brandon said, sometimes he's bringing something to the conversation that he hasn't worked out himself yet. And so I'm his partner in helping him learn how to express that. And so there's not this expectation that you need to have it all figured out or that you need to be perfect. Like we have to still say to each other, I'm not perfect, to remind ourselves that when something doesn't come off the right way, like we may still be working it out. And that's this idea. Thank you for mentioning that. Like, rather than a box, like we're not trying to box each other in. Like that's not the intention of even having rules or you know, guidelines. The intention behind having rules or guidelines in the relationship is to establish a base layer of trust and like a performance standard, which may sound like a weird word to use here, but you know, he has to be able to count on me to act in a certain way, and I need to know what my boundaries are as well for him, and vice versa, because we're committed to each other's sexual health as well, right? So I need to operate and behave within certain boundaries, and my boundaries may not be the same as his, and so we need to level, right? So by having those commitments, then we get to have an established layer of trust. But it's really important to note that we evolved through that to a place that was really less restrictive, because at a certain point it became, oh, well, this guideline's kind of boxing in my expression. And it may have worked for me 6 months ago, a week ago, a day ago, but now it doesn't. And so we need to have that conversation and talk about, well, how are we evolving this? How do we create more freedom of expression? Because, I mean, I'll just put this out there. Maybe it's me, but if I didn't have freedom of expression, I wouldn't want to be in the relationship. You know, if I feel like I'm in a relationship that's restricting my expression, then I have no interest in being in that relationship. So it's not about, you know, putting someone under like lock and chain. It's about how do we co-evolve together in a way that feels safe, but is respecting the fact that we are individual human beings that have a need to express and explore and experience life to its fullest. You know, I want him to experience life to its fullest. That's why I can have compersion when he's going out on a date or dating someone he's really excited about. I mean, he's going out on a date, that kind of feels but also excited that he is interacting with someone that he's excited to develop that relationship with, you know? So I can hold that paradox. It's a pluralist approach to life. So
you had this Google Doc back in the day with a million rules in it, and then you had a reset. You reset the game. You came into a whole new agreement with each other. What's in that new Google Doc? Is there just one or two sentences? Like what we're talking about this platform that now supports a level of expression and freedom. What's the language? Like, what's the actual commitment? Is there an actual moment where you say, I promise that I'll do this?
Yeah. And part of what left in the ending, you know, that like resetting, was the actual Google Doc. Because there was no longer, you know, the 7 points, you know, that we couldn't actually remember on our own, and we needed a document. We needed a document.
We knew that wasn't going to work.
You know, so that was an indicator to us that, you know, maybe that structure wasn't working.
It served in the past, and it wasn't working anymore.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and really what we came to, and I think what we settle on now, is a commitment to each other's emotional, physical, spiritual, and mental well-being.
And to be an open, honest, and transparent communication at all times.
Yeah.
And those are intentions, not rules. You know, so the intention is to be open, honest, and transparent at all times. And the intention is to be able to hold Brandon's emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical well-being to the highest degree possible at that time. So it's an intention. And that means it might look differently as we go. And that's where, you know, the box became a platform. The Google Doc box became the intention platform. And we don't have those written down because they're easy to remember and they're pretty basic, you know, for us. But I want to note that it took us a while to get there. Like, you're talking 4 to 5 years of making very big mistakes to get there, right? And we needed the rules and the guidelines. And so I would never poo-poo that if someone has those, because that's what establishes trust. And we were able to throw that out and put on the layer of intentions that we just mentioned, because we're building on top of that prior experience. And so I can't underscore enough, like, do what you need to do to feel safe and to establish trust. And the more that you have tough conversations that push on that, how much trust do I really have here, the more that expands, the stronger and more resilient your relationship will become, so that you can get to a point where now I can trust in all of his activities and behaviors, he's going to abide by those intentions. And if he's not, I'm going to hear about it, and I don't need to ask him. You know, I don't need to make a direct question. I know that he's going to come to me when he needs to have that conversation.
Yeah. I've taken 2, maybe more, maybe 3 relationships from a point of total monogamy into near polyamory or sometimes polyamory. And I found that a very similar thing. It felt like the first few steps required putting on monster truck training wheels, you know, the tight restrictive rules. Like, you could only have this kind of sex and no sleeping over, and you got to tell me this and this and this. And it's like creating a bunch of armor to stay safe, because as your partner steps out of these traditional roles with you, there's of course a fear that they're gonna like someone more than you, or that the shape that you used to be in was what was keeping you together. And then as you start to experience that and actually reality check your fears, sometimes actually see your fears play out real time, you know, like, wow, my fear is happening right now. I feel it. Um, and actually survive it, have the relationship survive it, have those moments of the person experiencing themselves outside of the character that you create them as, outside of the character that the relationship creates them as. They get to be someone brand new for a moment, and then there's something so sweet about feeling someone come back to you, you know, feeling someone want to be with you, even though there's all these exciting things happen outside the relationship. And then I found that trust built up. It's like, oh, okay, I can trust that this person comes back. This person wants to choose time with me, choose to be connected to me. And I just felt like over the time, the training wheels in layers and layers started to fall off, and then the nuts and bolts fall off. And before you know it, you're kind of dancing in a very free way because there's an innate understanding of it.
Exactly.
But with me, it was like, we were talking about like a 3 or 4 year span
And then,
that required a. Go ahead.
yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I think is people's biggest curiosity is like, how do you deal with that jealousy and that fear around somebody leaving for somebody else? And I really struggled with that at the beginning. In the first like 2 years of our relationship, I was working very stable corporate job in Portland, and Matt was traveling quite a bit, and I I was having a hard time with this idea that he was going to meet somebody while he was traveling, and he would want to be with them more than he wanted to be with me. Mm-hmm. And I was really struggling with that. And he was getting ready to leave for a trip, and I was basically like in tears in this fear. And so we had a conversation about it, and I was just expressing, you know, my fear, and I don't remember the exact wording that he used, but it was something like, when you can see loving me even after the relationship is over, mm-hmm. you know, you'll be free from this. And that really occurred and like struck true for me when I realized that there is no guarantee. You know, it doesn't matter what kind of relationship I'm in,
how many rules we have.
Yeah, that, you know, there's the possibility that this won't be forever. And if I can imagine and picture loving him even through the ending of a relationship, I get freedom in that. And so when I started to see that and hold that love, like, I can just be love in this relationship. That's really what my option is. If I can be love, then I have freedom in that. And that really allowed me to let go of that jealousy and that fear, and just know that, you know what, I'm going to be whole and complete on my own. And, you know, we should all get to that place of really knowing that we are whole and complete on our own. Otherwise it's codependency, and that can be really not healthy. And from that place, I have so much more freedom and access to love within our relationship and outside of our relationship. And the fear, yeah, you know, there's still jealousy, but there's not fear. I don't have fear of losing Matthew. I know that what I bring to the table is amazing. And, you know, and I trust that he's always going to come home, you know, and that's where we're at in the evolution of our relationship now. And there's so much freedom in that. You know, I know that he chooses to come back. It's not because there's a ring on my finger or there's a paper document that was signed that says, you know, we're married. It's a choice that he makes because of what he gets from this relationship.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that the gift the price sometimes of an open relationship is facing your insecurity, your fear, and your jealousy, and actually having to feel them at a level that you probably have never, you expose yourself to them in a way that you haven't before. Whereas you may be hid behind rules. Suddenly it's like, okay, I'm like, you walk into it knowing you're going to feel that. And can we talk about what the gifts, that's the cost. What's the gifts on the other side? Like once you take on those challenges, what's available to you in life? What have you found on the other side of that challenge?
Well, I think in many ways, Brandon just said it. It was a pretty monumental moment in our relationship because as much as it was an impact on him, it was an impact on me too. You know, now I don't have to leave on a trip knowing that my partner is in shambles emotionally. And so what you get is you get freedom. I think why anyone is in an open relationship or a polyamorous relationship is on some level, there's a commitment to freedom of expression. And who are we as Americans, but, you know, looking for freedom of expression? I mean, this country was built on people that were going against the grain, and we still have that opportunity to use our discernment. Like there's times to rein it in, people, but you know, ultimately you got to live in a context where you know that you can at least ask for what you want and be heard. And in the story that Brandon, like, until you can see losing me and still loving me, this is always going to be a trap for you. Like there's no way out of the fear of losing someone until you let that go. And so the benefits of letting go any fear, on whatever level it's occurring, is ultimately freedom. But what that makes available is a more full expression of love. Because when you can love on top of the fear of loss, when you can have joy on the top of some kind of sadness, when you can have, you know, ecstasy on top of, you know, some kind of heart-wrenching tragedy, that is power. You know, that is life. And that's just acknowledging the human experience. Like it's never all good. You know, there's always something going on in the background. And our ability to live in that paradox, which is our emotional life, is always in paradox here. When we acknowledge that and get fluent at navigating it, then hey, like polyamory, I can love anyone that comes into my life that I have that resonance with. I can explore that relationship, and ultimately, for me, I get to grow spiritually. Like there's so many relationships and contracts that I have with people emotionally that if I was in a monogamous relationship, I'd never get the opportunity to experience or complete. You know, there's some relationships that come through my life that are 2 months long, 1 month long, and those are important. You know, it's the length of the relationship is not an indicator of its quality or its like value. Sometimes I need that 2-week experience with someone to discover something about myself, to help them move along on something that they're struggling with. And it's the relationship that provides that feedback loop, the intimacy that you get to experience by having that occur within the freedom of a polyamorous relationship, that ultimately makes life worth living.
Yeah. I found that when I had outside mini relationships, that you know, inside of a relationship, you tend to get into a practiced groove of how you are, how you be with someone. Like there's an identity that forms around you. There's kind of a personality shape that you find yourself turning into in a relationship. And then sometimes when you hop outside the relationship to have the experience with someone new, you find you're a blank slate. Whole new parts of your personality pop up and get to express themselves with someone new. And if those parts that pop up to be seen feel great, you know, like maybe you weren't creating space for that, or the other person, your usual partner, wasn't creating space for that, you might find something feels like really you, like this is really me. There's juice in this. There's juice in this aspect of my personality, how I'm being right here with this person. And I found that if it was really resonant, as I came back into the field of my primary partner, I wasn't willing to let that part of me go. like I would bring it into the room. Like that new part of me that I discovered was going to be in the relationship now. And it would usually surprise my partner. My partner would be like, what is this? What is this? Who is this character? But it gave me a little bit more of a blank slate for self-discovery through the mirrors of other people, I found. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, this getting to experience these mini lessons with other people.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the gifts. You know, you were asking about what are the gifts that that can come from this, and that's one of them, is that energy that gets exchanged in you know, a mini relationship. I like that term. That energy can be brought back and help fuel and feed this longer term relationship, you know, that we have, where you know, we get into our grooves and our patterns. And so to have something to, you know, the spectrum of color in our relationship, like, this is a beautiful gift. One of the other gifts that I've seen is, by moving through some of these difficult things like jealousy, is it actually brings us closer, right? It allows us to be closer. And I had a train. It's left the station temporarily.
Okay.
I will chase it down.
I also wanted to say, you know, the sex is better when you have a variety of sexual experiences. You get to explore more stuff that you may get into a rut with your current partner with, and you get to bring those new sexual experiences in, and it enlivens your own sexual life. So my sex outside of our relationship actually augments the sex within our relationship.
Yeah. I like the term pattern versus rut.
Pattern.
Agree. Yeah. Rut. Hey, rut can be a good thing. So one of the gifts that I found is that when you accept that you're going to feel jealousy and that you're going to have to process it and move through it, I found that for every ounce of jealousy that I worked through, I got 2 ounces of a self-esteem that I had anchored inside myself, and not so much someone's approval of me or someone's desire of me. Because the jealousy is most painful when you're basing your identity and self-worth on someone else's approval or someone else's attraction or someone else's attention. And that's why jealousy feels terrible, because the moment that attention, approval is pointed anywhere else but you, then it's like, I'm cut off from the source of this. I'm cut off from the thing that was feeding me. And that can be a dark night of the soul for a moment or two, until you start to re-anchor that within your own being. And once I found that once I really went through the process, I felt less and less and less jealous, more and more compersion. Compersion being you're enjoying someone else's joy, you're enjoying someone else's attraction, and then that's when the freedom really kicked in. And I found I became a much more confident individual by going through that with someone, because I didn't, it definitely de-anchors you from, or de-attaches you from that, what's the word, when you're dependent on someone, that codependent instinct.
Codependence. Yeah.
It definitely. Go ahead. What were you gonna say, Matt?
But just to augment that, I think you said it when, you know, you felt cut off from source. You know, for me, jealousy is fundamentally the illusion of separation. And whenever you feel separated in a relationship, whenever you feel not aligned, there's going to be an icky feeling there. And it's not that it's never going to happen, but when it does, and I'll say when it does happen, to get into a mindset or to remind yourself of your connection, of what's unique in your relationship. You know, there is a uniqueness in my relationship with Brandon that cannot be replicated elsewhere. That doesn't mean that I don't value those other relationships, or that there's not other opportunities in there. You know, the infinite universe is infinitely creative, And there's so much for me to learn outside of my relationship with Brandon. But at the same time, when I participate in the illusion, when my negative ego convinces me that I'm separate from this person that has proven and showed their love in so many ways to me, then I'm just participating in an illusion. Now, there's that. Again, you mentioned it too, that paradox, like, well, I don't want to be codependent either. The codependent that you're whole and complete, which I think is just separation from source. Like, you have connection with source because you're a human being. It's your birthright. And there's nothing that can disconnect you from that source except yourself, right? So jealousy, again, is you're separating from source if you're falling into codependency. So there's an access spiritually to thrive in relationships when you remind yourself of your own divinity. And that's part of my work with the own divinity, and it has these implications on self-confidence, on freedom of expression, on creativity. And it's within those realms that we can find our fullest expression as a human being on this earth.
Yeah. But my little signal to myself, it's kind of like an equation. If your equation says, I am beautiful, interesting, gorgeous, lovable, if this person is focused on me, then that's kind of the recipe for where you're going to fall on your face or really experience jealousy. It's kind of leaning back out of that into a state of being, of recognizing, can I feel that I am beautiful, sexy, gorgeous, hot, period? Can I feel that? Is that me? Am I interesting, relevant, desirable? Do I have something worth hearing? Whenever your partner's attention is off you, there's that feeling like, oh, am I not interesting enough? And it's re-anchoring that state of being, I am fascinating. I have something that's super important to hear, even if my partner is not hearing it right now. And what's cool is that as you give your partner permission to remagnetize to different things sometimes, because it's like, that's what's happening. There's maybe a spiritual draw outside of this bubble that you're in that says, hey, I need you to get this piece of information. I need you to have this experience. If you have that anchored in your own being, that you are those things, that you are fascinating, you're interesting, you're valid, you have something to say, you're worthwhile spending time to, that state of being allows those experiences to flow in, even if your partner is not responsible for giving them to you. It's just, you find all these things showing up in your life that are reflecting how fascinating you are, how relevant you are, how beautiful you are, how dead sexy you are. And I find that's kind of the game. And that, to me, that was the gift, is that I can be in that state all the time, regardless of what other people were doing around me.
Yeah. And again, polyamorous relationships are for everyone, but in the LGBT space, we got to walk our talk. Like, diversity is powerful, and having a diverse experience actually makes my relationship stronger. And so just reminding yourself, if you're in that place where you're feeling jealous that your partner is out on a date and you're home, like, watching Netflix, that you just remind yourself that there's a power that's being developed there. There's a magnetism, is a great word for that. That tension is getting created when they're not with you, that brings you closer together. And, I do travel a lot for work, and I think that's actually a strength of our relationship, is that, I'm called to serve all over the nation and sometimes internationally. And that time apart actually creates an attraction or a magnetism that when we're back together, we can live into more passionately and more fully. And so for me, I turned that into a strength. You can flip jealousy on its head when you remember your connection with your own source and with your own confidence and your own divinity. So,
yeah. So, there's one thing I wanted to revisit a little bit that I think is a really important question. Since the title of this is the skill, I think we titled it the skills that really, essential communication tools for polyamorous relationships, what kills good communication? What kills transparency? What are the things that you might be tempted to do that will cost or remove the, how do I say it, that kind of sour the field of being able to be transparent? And I'll throw one out there. When, like, for me, if I reveal what's happening for me, if I say, hey, I had this experience and I want to tell you about it, and the person leaps into a kind of judgment for what I just told them, like, that teaches me that it's not necessarily safe to be transparent, or that this isn't valuable to the other person, or it teaches me that it's going to hurt a lot to be transparent, or it's going to, does that make sense? Like, for me, that's one of the things that makes it hard to be transparent, is when I know that I'm going to be faced with this.
When you asked the question, I mean, immediately what came to mind for me is not listening. If you're, the fastest way to shut down these kinds of conversations is to not listen. And, what I think is listening may not be what Brandon thinks is listening. And it doesn't matter what I think is listening. And it doesn't matter what I think is right. And it doesn't matter what I think. Listening is letting the other person speak and express, not on my terms.
And yeah, and I think for me, the thing that came up immediately, what goes with that is curiosity, or in the way that you kind of phrase the question, what kills it is a lack of curiosity, right? And if we don't have an openness to listen to what is happening for the other person, and we don't have an openness to hear what's happening for us when we hear this thing, right? That curiosity is gone, then there's really no room for exploration. There's no room for something to be created in that,
One thing to remember is, and again, like, total respect for people who choose monogamy. So this isn't a diss on monogamy, but I'm just saying the practical differences are in a monogamous relationship, you can pretty much expect that an intimate emotional development in someone's intimate emotional body, your partner is going to be aware of, because they were probably participating in it. But in a polyamorous relationship, that's not guaranteed. I might have evolved emotionally, and Brandon doesn't know that. And so when he comes to the conversation with that preconceived notion, which, by the way, is the best he can ever do, so I can't fault him for that, but he may not be where I'm at. And if he thinks that he is, and thus is not listening, or if I haven't expressed what needed to be expressed to give him the update, then, the conversation is going to derail really quickly. That's why it's important for me to be emotionally transparent and in communication. And it's important for him to come with curiosity, because I might not have known how I changed. Traditionally, Eric, you're a coach, and I've heard amazing testimonials of your sessions with people. Humans are terrible self-reflectors. That's why we need coaches. We need people outside of us to reflect back what's going on, to get that accurate picture. So sometimes I don't even know how I've developed emotionally, but in that conversation with Brandon, he's actually helping me discover what has changed. And I may just feel different, but not know how to express it. And so it's important for him to come with curiosity and me to come with transparency in order to get there.
Yes. I think what you just said is probably the hugest gift that good communication and curiosity can give someone, is that, and I'll give you an example of how this practically works out. Let's just say your partner comes to you with something, and it may be something triggering. Like, it may be something that you didn't necessarily want to hear. And if you immediately run with judgment or deflection, then the information stream's done. Like, you can't get the information out of it. But if instead you can kind of hold your emotion off to the side a little bit, knowing that there's space to get to it, and start to ask questions, one of the best ways is to kind of do active listening, rephrase what you're hearing your partner say, and then as your partner, as you rephrase it, click on the details. I call it clicking on the details. Like, click on the hyperlinks. If your partner said something that looked like it had some emotion in it, click on it. Say, like, tell me more about that. Like, I noticed you choked up when you said this word. Like, what is that? What are you feeling? What's happening in your body? What kind of emotions are coming up in you? What beliefs are getting activated in you? And if you can go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers deep, then you may help your partner get to something that they didn't even know was coming up for them. Like, there's the thing on the surface, but then there's the real stuff that's below the surface. And then sometimes it requires a couple of rounds of asking questions and going deeper and following those threads with someone. And I find that when I have a partner and I can follow those threads with them, suddenly they had the tools they needed to discover themselves that they couldn't quite get to all on their own. They needed like 3 days meditating at that place, but you helped them get there in 20 minutes because you're willing to be a reflection of their nervous system. You were willing to kind of help them hold their brain open a little bit more and get to the soul of the matter. And that could be, I mean, when I experienced that relationship, it's pure gold. It's enlightenment. It's enlightenment inside the capsule of a nice relationship.
Yeah, and this is a good opportunity to return to the point that I think is really important is, I may not want to speak something, and I know that I don't want to speak it. I also may know that he doesn't want to hear it. I may know that. Mm-hmm. That's not a reason not to say it. Exactly for the gold that you're talking about is we will talk ourselves out of being emotionally transparent and and transparent in our communication, because it's like, oh, well, I know he doesn't want to hear that, or I know he's going to be angry if I say that, or I know they're going to have this and this reaction. Not a reason not to say it. The reason to say it is because it needs to be said to catch that person up. And part of that process may be helping them come to a different relationship with that information. Brandon having a negative reaction to something that I said is part of his process too. And so I'm helping him work through whatever his blockages are by saying that. And that's part of the gold that we have access to. And that's what helps the relationship to evolve into that next level of joy and happiness and fulfillment and expression.
Yeah, and what I would add to that, and what I was gonna say, kind of in response to what you just mentioned, Eric, was that we have to also allow space for it to be messy, because we might be, both people in the relationship could very well be discovering things for themselves at the same time as you go through this, right? So, if Matt brings something to me that I don't want to hear, I might be a mess the first time that we go through this. It might not be a perfect conversation of us unraveling and following threads and it being some beautiful evolution of a conversation. I might be a fucking disaster, and that's okay. Part of what makes a relationship is the persistence to get through those conversations. And if I have a reaction that, okay, I heard the thing, I am upset, I'm angry, or I'm mad, or whatever the thing is, like, okay, let that be the first attempt at that conversation, and having the persistence to be able to come back and revisit it. And allowing the space for it not to be perfect and not to look beautiful and look amazing the first time or the second time around. I think that's a really important thing to remember. And kind of one of the first things that was mentioned is, we have this idea that relationships are like, good relationships are this like beautiful wonderland of like healthy conversations and everything looks great. And it's like, we can
never fight. I never trust a relationship when someone says we never fight.
And so you really have to hold the space that it can be messy, and be able to be persistent and work through that and get to the point where you've both fully expressed and gotten to those deeper levels of like, wow, that was actually a lot that just unfolded, you know, and it's going to look really different for each person in the relationship.
Yeah.
My invitation to everyone listening to this is to just post somewhere that good relationships are built, not discovered. And even if you don't know what that means, start to get in conversation with your community about what that means, particularly with your partner if you have one. But if you don't, start talking with your friends about how good relationships are built, not discovered, because this is going to yield, that conversation is going to yield so many gems for you as you engage in your next intimate relationship.
I have one subject I thought about talking about for people stepping into polyamory. There's a thing of pacing. That's one of the things I've noticed really came up for me, in that you're like, okay, we're doing this, and then the experiences actually start to come. There's the idea, and then it starts to crystallize into, oh, you slept with that person. Oh, okay, you stayed over that night. Oh, okay, this happened. Wow. Ooh. Oh, I felt that. And it's the as you move, you're often, there's like an upping the ante that happens, especially when you're moving from a real tight, like you can only do this, into just giving a person free reign or a greater level of freedom. Is that one person will move dramatically beyond the other person in what's happened so far. You know, it's nice when it's like, okay, I did this, oh, you did something similar. I did this, you did something similar. Then every once in a while, someone just goes to the next level, and you're like, whoa, I was not ready for that. And do you have any stories of that happening for you too, where the pacing gets kind of off and one person kind of goes into a whole nother stratosphere, and there's this kind of moment that happens for you?
This is
Yeah, you know, and it's really interesting. It's there's
an example.
There's an idea of what's the word is it's kind of like mirroring, leveling. That's the word that I was looking for. And it's like a conversation tool, right? Like, or an intimacy tool. Like, what level are you willing to proceed at? You know, sometimes
it's a consent conversation.
Yeah, it's part of it's a consent tool.
Both an example.
And so that happens, like you're saying.
Pause.
Yeah.
Pause. Say that. Rewind 15 seconds and say that again, because we lost the signal for a second. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. What that brings up for me is this idea of leveling, and
which is like a consent conversation.
Yeah, it's like a consent tool, and that happens in the relationship, and kind of like as you described it. You know, so you're gonna have what you can talk about and agree upon, and then there's going to be this continual pushing, right, of somebody like starts to have feelings for somebody. You know, there's like the open relationship, or you're only allowed to have sex, but then suddenly there's like, oh, well, you've seen them a few times, it seems like maybe a relationship is developing, or something more than a hookup is there, and that's going to continuously kind of push the comfort zone of that relationship. And you know, that's natural, for especially in the open and poly relationship dynamic. It's something that I certainly experienced, and it's part of where, like, you know, we had these rules in the relationship of you know, making sure that you share your intention of going to connect with somebody beforehand, or only having protected sex, you know, outside of our relationship. And those moments where these boundaries get pushed, and maybe you step beyond what the boundary was, and then you come back to the relationship, and then everybody gets to like, okay, feel what was that like? You know, like this thing happened. Now you're back, you're leveling with your partner, and you get to feel it on the relationship, on each of us, and be like, whoa, okay, like, what does this feel like? How does this feel? And those moments are actually what gave us the opportunity to kind of look at and discover, like, is this commitment really necessary in the relationship? Like, yes, it is. Let's revisit that. And okay, we level again and we decide, okay, maybe having unprotected sex outside of the relationship isn't right for us right now. This thing happened. We can re-level and come back to this place of agreement. And, and that's what feels right in that moment of the relationship. And so these things are very natural progressions and allow you to kind of test the boundary. Like, is this something that's in support of the relationship? Is this an unnecessary constraint? Or, for right now, is this what's really, really valid and helps us hold this container of safety that allows us to move,
Yeah.
Do you have an example of when I did something and you were like, whoa, gotta rein it in a little bit?
Well, I think I just gave one, like, unprotected sex outside of the relationship. That was a big thing for us kind of at the beginning. And, there were transgressions of that commitment, and the relationship was able to hold that transgression and for us to be able to come back and level, and then ultimately, set aside that commitment, because our trust and our love and our caring for each other, that the commitment to care for each other's mental, emotional, physical well-being actually takes care of that rule, so to speak.
Yeah, we had conversations about, well, how do you have that conversation with someone? How do you, what makes that situation safe for you? And we were able to, like, now I know, like, what feels safe to Brandon and how that may differ on what feels safe to me. Another example for me is when Brandon said that he wanted to go to a festival in Spain with someone he was dating. And I was like, whoa, you're going to go international for a week with this guy that I haven't met yet. It's like this thing where you get to, like, look someone in the eye when they're dating your partner, but I didn't get to do that yet, and I'm like, okay, do I want, like, this is confronting. Like, I'm going to let Brandon, like, go on this international trip with this beautiful man who I love and adore, and was not able to, like, it took me a second to be like, I don't know if I'm okay with that, and I wanted to have a conversation with him, and I had to do all these things, right, to, like, get there. But, that was an example for me where it was pushing the boundary of the relationship.
Yeah, the something you just mentioned, the partner sniff test, which you bring these people that you're connecting with around your partner, and there's this kind of dog-like, like, sniffing each other's tail a little bit of, like, okay, who is this person? What do I feel about him?
Mm-hmm.
And
when you talked about pacing, I'll note two things. Like, one, I think it's really important when you first start dating someone that you just make room for there being, there's like a germination. Oh, sorry. There's like a germination period or something where, like, you need to spend an inordinate amount of time with that person. Maybe not the amount of time that you would spend with that person in the future, but, like, in the beginning, there's, like, a seed process that happens where you just, like, need to get into relationship with that person enough times in a compacted period of time so you can develop the trust that you need to be able to date that person while you're with your, previous partner. And I mean, develop that trust with the new person, not with your previous partner, but develop the trust with the new person, and, like, have a compacted period of time where you're going to spend some time with that person in order to, like, develop some ways of working and communicating that will allow that relationship to thrive. So I think that's a really important step to note in the relationship. And then also, like you said, the partner sniff test, like, at some point, there's no hard and fast rule for this, but you just got to schedule that date where it's like the three of you sit down and just, like, have a conversation over dinner. And, you get to say all the things that you're concerned about, or, like, have the conversation with, like, who are you? Like, tell me about you. You're dating my partner, but I have no idea who you are. So, like, having that conversation makes me feel a lot more safe when Brandon's going off and having experiences or sleepovers, or week-long trips to Spain with this person, right? So it's like this opportunity to care for my own emotional well-being by getting the opportunity to have those conversations with my metamor.
Metamor. What is that?
Yeah. So
What is
metamor, so compersion and metamor, I think are two important terms that we use pretty regularly. So like you already mentioned compersion, where I get joy from Brandon experiencing joy, or vice versa. You know, my compersion is I feel joy because this other person is feeling joy, in the case where it may not be joy with me, right? And then metamor is my partner's lover. So someone that he is in an intimate relationship with that I am not typically, is that person is my metamor. So for me, I'm Brandon's partner, but Brandon's dating a third person. That third person is my metamor.
Okay. Metamor is your partner's lover. I'm noticing that we may have to conclude kind of soon, because I could talk about this forever, but I'm noticing it's about that time of day when all the Greek people are coming home and watching Netflix. And so that undersea cable between Colorado and the coast of Greece is kind of getting constricted with all the internet traffic. So it may be a good time to start wrapping up. There's so many good things here to talk about, because what you're talking about, I've had the trip with the metamor, that's such a frontier for so many people. For myself, like, no matter how cool and much practice I have at this, that's one that you feel for sure. And I could explore this a lot more.
Well, Brandon, I do want to say we're committed to staying in these conversations with people. And one of the things that we've been producing or working on is our own kind of curriculum around what is the communication that's important for people in relationship, particularly polyamorous relationships. So we actually want to announce that on Wednesdays around 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're committed to having this conversation. We're going to start doing a kind of a live Zoom and allowing people to have some conversation with us and ask us questions. So happy to be a support to the community. You know, we were doing heart circles in person, so now we're kind of taking our heart circle online. So you can look us up. Mine's just facebook.matthewkoren.com, and you'll come to my Facebook page, and we'll find a way to promote a Wednesday 7 p.m. just kind of like open dialogue, and you know, people come and ask questions, and we're happy to answer more questions.
Could you put the links to both of your businesses and Facebook pages in the comment section of this, so that people can follow, you know, kind of connect with you deeper? That would be great.
Is that the chat on Zoom or something else?
Yeah, the chat. I'll tag you in it to make sure. I think I tagged you, so just look
Okay.
on your page. I'm also going to post this in my relationship.
Oh, on our Facebook page. Okay.
Yeah, just put all your information on this so people can kind of continue deeper with the story. I'd love to have these conversations with you some more, you know, go deeper into some of these subjects.
Yeah, there's so much more to go into. Thanks for generating this conversation.
I'm kind of, this is my first weekend really learning how to broadcast on Zoom, and it's challenging, but I think as we get more practice with this, no, put it in the Facebook side where people can see it, because I can only see that.
Yeah, I'm going to. And
so,
is this on your Facebook page?
Yeah, and you're tagged.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I wouldn't pull up Facebook right now. It's going to make that connection really tough.
We'll just do
last night I saw the Radical Fairy no talent show across Zoom, and they had like
that's so much fun.
500 fairies in little windows with funny outfits and hats, and they were doing a talent show on Zoom, and I'm like, oh, this technology is amazing. Even if like some fairy from Tel Aviv would be doing a number and he'd freeze for 2 seconds. Last night I saw the he would freeze and lag for a few seconds, but it was still so charming. So I think we're all trying to work out how to keep this connection going, but give it a couple of weeks. We're going to be smooth. We're going to have all these communities going. So Oh, great. I saw it. Okay. Kalinita from Thessaloniki, Greece. And I'm gonna, if anyone wants to follow,
Oh, awesome.
all three of us are doing coaching, right? Spirit and transition is.
Yeah, so I do like a spiritual development kind of flavor of coaching, and I work with people on an initiatory path called the Lineage of King Solomon. And so this is an opportunity for people to come into relationship with their higher self and spiritual gifts.
Yeah, and I have a couple forms of coaching that I do. I do psychedelic preparation and integration coaching. I do nutritional detox therapy, and I work with clients who are coming through addiction, and I do addiction recovery integration coaching.
Amazing. And I think it's funny, we all kind of do some similar things. I have two main forms of coaching. When I call inner compass coaching, which is really tuning in to what your spirit is saying and allowing your personality and your ego to recalibrate to that main message that's coming through you, and allowing it to lead you through life. And relationship coaching, which is why there's such an affinity between three of us. We have so much to share. I hope you two have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And I'll see you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Yes, definitely. It's always wonderful to share space with you. I look forward to being able to do that in person soon.
Yay! Maybe in Colorado. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everyone, for watching.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Social distance hugs.
Social distance high five.
Okay. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.